In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that most species learn too late. Never underestimate a human's capacity for both love and vengeance. The Galactic Council believed they understood humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy. Peaceful diplomats, eager traders, and surprisingly resilient survivors. But they had never witnessed what happens when you take everything from someone who has nothing left to lose. Ambassador Marcus Chun was known throughout the galaxy as the gentle voice of Earth, a man who could negotiate peace between warring species with nothing but words and patience. What the alien powers didn't know was that his greatest strength wasn't his diplomatic training. It was the woman who stood silently by his side at every formal gathering, introducing herself simply as Elena Chun, the ambassador's wife. They should have asked more questions. They should have wondered why her eyes constantly swept every room like a predator marking territory. They should have noticed how she moved with the fluid grace of someone for whom violence was as natural as breathing. Most importantly, they should have researched what retired meant in the context of Earth's most classified military units. But they didn't ask. They didn't wonder. They didn't research. And now, as Ambassador Chin's blood cooled on the marble floors of the Proxima Station's Grand Hall, they were about to learn that some humans are diplomats by choice, but warriors by nature. The Galactic Council had just declared war on the most dangerous woman in known space, and she was only getting started. The crystalline spires of Proxima Station gleamed against the star-filled void, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 different suns in a cascade of prismatic beauty. For most species in the galaxy, the station represented the pinnacle of cooperative achievement, a neutral ground where even the most bitter enemies could meet under the protection of Galactic Council law. Ambassador Marcus Chun had always found it ironic that such a beautiful place housed so many ugly intentions. He adjusted his diplomatic jacket one final time as the transport shuttle docked with the station's main port. The fabric, woven with threads that shifted color depending on the angle of light, was a gift from the textile artisans of Kepler, 442b. It had become something of a trademark for him over his 15 years of service, a visual reminder that humanity valued beauty alongside functionality. What most beings didn't know was that the jacket also contained microfilaments of human military-grade armor, a precaution insisted upon by his wife. Elena Chin sat beside him in the shuttle's passenger compartment, her hands folded calmly in her lap as she gazed out at the approaching station. To any observer, she appeared to be exactly what her diplomatic credentials claimed: the devoted wife of Earth's most successful ambassador, a woman content to support her husband's career from the shadows. Her dress was elegant but understated, her dark hair pulled back in a simple style that complemented the diplomatic protocols of a dozen different species. Only Marcus knew that beneath the silk fabric, she wore enough concealed weaponry to take down a small army. The Zephyrian delegation arrived 3 hours ago, Elena said quietly, her voice carrying the slight accent she had never quite managed to erase despite decades away from her birthplace. Their security detail is larger than usual, 12 guards instead of the standard 6. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The Zephyrians had been growing increasingly aggressive in their territorial claims over the past year, and this negotiation was their last chance to resolve things peacefully before the Galactic Council authorized military intervention. As the representative of humanity, one of the Council's newest and least militarily powerful members, Marcus had been chosen as the mediator specifically because Earth was seen as non-threatening. Any word from the Centaurian fleet? He asked, referring to the other major party in the territorial dispute. Minimal communication. Their ambassador seems confident they can resolve this without making significant concessions. Elena's tone remained neutral, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes. After 23 years of marriage, he could read her micro-expressions like others read books. You think something's wrong? I think both sides came here expecting to get everything they want with minimal compromise. That usually means someone's planning to flip the table if the negotiations don't go their way. The shuttle completed its docking sequence with a soft thud that resonated through the hull. Marcus stood and smoothed his jacket again, a nervous habit he developed early in his diplomatic career. Elena rose beside him, and for a moment they stood close enough that he could smell the faint scent of the jasmine perfume she'd worn since their wedding day. "If things go badly," he began. "They won't," she interrupted gently, placing a hand on his arm. "You're the best negotiator the galaxy has. You'll find a way to make this work." Her confidence in him had never wavered, not since the day they'd met at a military briefing 25 years ago. He'd been a young diplomatic attaché assigned to observe joint operations between Earth's special forces and alien allies. She'd been the operative whose identity was so classified that she was listed in all official documents only as Specialist Echo 7. It had taken him 6 months to learn her real name, another year to convince her to have dinner with him, and 3 years to persuade her that a life beyond the shadows might be worth trying. The airlock cycled open, revealing the opulent interior of Proxima Station's diplomatic wing. The corridor stretched before them like something from a dream, its walls lined with art and artifacts from hundreds of worlds. Floating light spheres drifted overhead, providing illumination that automatically adjusted to the visual spectrums of whatever species happened to be walking beneath them. The air recycling system had been programmed to maintain a perfect balance of atmospheric components that could support the respiratory needs of the galaxy's major spacefaring races. A tall, willowy being with pale blue skin and eyes like liquid silver approached them. Marcus recognized Administrator Vexhai, one of the station's senior diplomatic coordinators and a member of the Andromedan Collective. The Andromedans had a reputation for neutrality that bordered on the fanatical, making them ideal intermediaries for sensitive negotiations. "Ambassador Chun, Mrs. Chun, welcome to Proxima Station," Vexhai said in the musical tones that characterized his species' speech. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Very much so," Marcus replied, falling into the formal cadence that diplomatic protocol required. "We're honored to serve as mediators in these important discussions." "The honor is ours." Both delegations have already arrived and are settled in their respective quarters. The preliminary sessions are scheduled to begin in 4 hours, which should give you sufficient time to review the updated position papers and perhaps rest from your travels. As they walked through the station's corridors, Marcus noted the increased security presence. Uniformed guards from a dozen different species stood at regular intervals, their weapons prominently displayed despite the station's supposedly neutral status. It was unusual, but not unprecedented for high-stakes negotiations. Elena walked slightly behind, and to his left, her posture relaxed, but her eyes constantly moving. She was cataloging escape routes, weapons placements, and potential threat vectors with the automatic efficiency of someone for whom situational awareness had become second nature. Marcus had long since stopped asking her about it. Some habits from her previous life would never fade completely. Their quarters were located in the diplomatic wing's most prestigious section, with a view that encompassed both the Zephyrian and Centaurian fleet positions. The accommodations were luxurious by any standard, featuring adaptive furniture that could reconfigure itself for the comfort of multiple species and a communication array that provided real-time updates from across the galaxy. "I need to review the position papers," Marcus said as they settled into the suite. "The Zephyrian claims have shifted since the last round of talks, and I want to understand their new angle before we begin." Elena nodded and moved to the large window that dominated the main living area. From their vantage point, she could see the sleek warships of both fleets maintaining their positions in the space around the station. The vessels held their formations with military precision, close enough to demonstrate their presence, but far enough apart to avoid any accidental provocations. "Marcus," she said after several minutes of observation, "come look at this." He joined her at the window, following her gaze to the fleet positions. At first, everything appeared normal. 2 groups of ships maintaining a respectful distance from each other and the neutral station. Then, Elena pointed to a specific area of space where several smaller vessels hung motionless against the starfield. Those aren't on the official fleet rosters, she said quietly. And their positioning is all wrong for escort duties. Marcus studied the ships more carefully. They were sleek and angular, with design characteristics he didn't immediately recognize. More concerning was their location. They formed a loose perimeter around the station that would be perfect for preventing escape rather than protecting against attack. Could they be private security? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. Private security doesn't use military-grade stealth coding. Elena's voice had taken on the crisp, analytical tone she'd once used during mission briefings. Someone's planning to make sure that whatever happens here stays here. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. The negotiation wasn't meant to succeed. It was meant to provide cover for something else entirely. But what? And which side was responsible? Before he could voice these questions, the suite's communication system chimed with an incoming message. The holographic display activated automatically, revealing the image of Administrator HFY. Ambassador Chun, I apologize for the interruption, but there has been a slight change to the schedule. The Zephyrian delegation has requested that the preliminary session be moved up to begin in 1 hour. They cite urgent communications from their home world that require immediate attention. Marcus felt Elena tense beside him, though her expression remained perfectly neutral. Of course, he replied to HFY. We'll be ready. The communication ended, leaving them alone in the suddenly silent suite. Marcus turned to Elena, who was already moving toward their luggage with purposeful strides. I don't like rushed timelines, she said, pulling out a small device that looked like a standard diplomatic scanner, but which Marcus knew contained sensors far more sophisticated than anything available commercially. Someone's trying to compress the schedule, which usually means they want to complete their agenda before anyone has time to think too carefully about what's happening. She activated the device and began a systematic sweep of the suite. Within minutes, she had located 3 hidden surveillance devices, each one more sophisticated than station security would normally use. The discovery confirmed what they both already suspected. They were walking into a trap. What's the play? Marcus asked, falling back into the shorthand communication style they developed during their early years together when her work had required absolute discretion. You go to the negotiation as planned, Elena said, her hands already working to modify the surveillance devices rather than simply disable them. Someone went to a lot of trouble to set this up, and we need to know why before we can figure out how to stop it. And you? Elena looked up from her work, and, for just a moment, Marcus saw past the diplomat's wife to the woman who had once been considered the most dangerous operative in Earth's military arsenal. Her eyes held the calm focus of someone preparing for war. I'm going to find out who's really behind this, and then I'm going to make sure they regret involving civilians in their plans. The hour passed quickly. Marcus reviewed what intelligence they had on both delegations while Elena conducted a more thorough reconnaissance of the station's security arrangements. What she found was troubling. The normal rotation schedules for station personnel had been modified. Several key systems showed signs of recent tampering, and the emergency lockdown protocols have been quietly updated to prevent unauthorized departure. When the time came for the preliminary session, Marcus made his way to Conference Room Alpha with the measured pace of a diplomat preparing for routine negotiations. Elena accompanied him as far as the corridor outside, playing her role as the supportive spouse who would wait patiently for her husband's return. The conference room was a masterpiece of diplomatic architecture, designed to make every participant feel equally important and equally vulnerable. The circular table could accommodate representatives from dozens of species, with each seat equipped with translation matrices, atmospheric controls, and discrete defensive barriers in case discussions became heated. The Zephyrian delegation was already present when Marcus arrived. They were an imposing sight even by galactic standards. Tall, broad-shouldered beings with skin that shifted between deep purple and silver, depending on their emotional state. Their leader, Ambassador Thexvar, stood nearly 3 meters tall and had the kind of presence that dominated any room he entered. His delegation flanked him in perfect formation, their posture radiating barely contained aggression. The Centaurians arrived moments later, their ambassador leading a group that moved with the fluid grace characteristic of their aquatic origins. Their skin held a blue-green tint that reflected the room's lighting, and their large, dark eyes missed nothing as they took their positions across from the Zephyrians. Honored delegates, Marcus began, taking his position at the head of the table. I want to thank you all for your commitment to finding a peaceful resolution to the territorial dispute regarding the Kepler 438 system. The Galactic Council has asked me to facilitate these discussions with the hope that we can reach an agreement that serves the interests of all parties. Ambassador Thexvar's skin had shifted to a deep purple that Marcus recognized as indicating extreme irritation. Ambassador Chun, with respect to your position, my people have grown tired of talk. The Kepler 438 system rightfully belongs to the Zephyrian Empire, and we will not be denied our claim any longer. The system was first surveyed by Centaurian explorers, countered Ambassador Releth, the Centaurian leader. Our colonies were established there over 200 years ago. We will not be driven from our rightful territory by threats and bluster. Marcus had mediated similar disputes dozens of times before, and he recognized the signs of positions that had hardened beyond the point of reasonable compromise. But something felt different about this confrontation. There was an undercurrent of inevitability that suggested both sides already knew how this would end. Perhaps we could begin by examining the historical record more closely, he suggested. The Council's archival systems contain detailed surveys of first contact and settlement patterns that might help clarify the legitimate claims. The time for examining records has passed, Thexvar said, his skin now shifting to an angry silver. My government has authorized me to make one final offer. The Centaurians withdraw from all worlds in the Kepler 438 system within 30 standard days, or we will remove them by force. And my government has authorized me to reject any such ultimatum, Releth replied, his gills fluttering in a way that indicated extreme agitation. We will defend our colonies with every resource at our disposal. Marcus felt the negotiations slipping away from him, but he pressed on. This was what he did. He found solutions when others saw only conflict. There must be some middle ground we can explore, perhaps a joint administration of the system, or a division of territory based on current population distributions. Both ambassadors turned to look at him with expressions that ranged from pity to contempt. It was Thexvar who spoke first. Ambassador Chun, you represent a species that has been part of the galactic community for less than 50 years. Your people have no significant military power, no territorial claims of importance, and no real influence over galactic affairs. Why would you imagine that your opinion carries any weight in matters of real consequence? The word stung, but Marcus had heard similar dismissals before. Humanity's relative weakness in galactic affairs was a constant challenge in his work. Because, he said quietly, sometimes an outside perspective can see solutions that those too close to the problem cannot. The only solution here, Releth interjected, is for the Zephyrians to abandon their illegal territorial ambitions and respect the sovereign rights of established colonies. The only solution, Thexvar countered, is for inferior species to accept their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. And there was the real heart of the conflict. This wasn't about territory or resources or even historical claims. It was about power, and both sides had decided that the time for sharing had ended. Marcus tried for another hour to find some crack in their positions, some opening that might allow for compromise. But with each passing minute, it became clear that neither delegation had come here to negotiate. They had come to provide a legal pretext for war, and his presence was nothing more than a formality required by Galactic Council law. It was during a brief recess, as the delegates stepped away from the table to consult with their advisors, that Marcus felt the station shudder slightly around him. The sensation was so subtle that most beings would have missed it entirely, but His years of space travel had taught him to recognize the signs of weapons fire, even through heavy shielding. The conference room's main doors slid open, and Administrator Vexhai entered with an expression of barely controlled panic. Ambassadors, I regret to inform you that we have a situation developing around the station. Both the Zephyrian and Centaurian fleets have begun moving to attack positions. That's impossible, Marcus said, though even as he spoke he could see on the room's view screen that the orderly fleet formations had dissolved into the chaotic positioning of imminent battle. The negotiations are still ongoing. I'm afraid, Fexvar said with a smile that revealed rows of predatory teeth, that the negotiations were never intended to succeed. The words hung in the air like a death sentence as Marcus realized that everything he had worked for, everything he believed about the power of peaceful resolution, had just been revealed as an elaborate lie. And somewhere in the station, Elena was about to discover that her husband had been invited to his own execution. The war had already begun, and Marcus Chun was standing at ground zero with nowhere to run. Elena Chun had spent the first 30 minutes of her husband's negotiation conducting what appeared to be a casual tour of the diplomatic wing's public areas. She stopped occasionally to admire the artistic displays from various worlds, pausing just long enough at each location to memorize sight lines, identify potential weapons, and note the positions of security personnel. To any observer, she looked like exactly what she claimed to be, a diplomat's wife with time to kill while her husband worked. The station's layout was more complex than the public schematic suggested. Elena had identified at least 3 levels that didn't appear on any official blueprint, and the security arrangements were far more sophisticated than necessary for a simple territorial negotiation. Whatever was happening here involved players with resources that extended well beyond the Zephyrian and Centaurian governments. She was examining a crystalline sculpture from the Vegan Confederacy when the first hint of trouble emerged. A group of maintenance workers passed through the corridor, their movements just slightly too coordinated for civilians going about routine duties. Elena recognized the subtle signs of military training in their posture and spacing. These weren't station personnel, they were soldiers disguised as maintenance staff. The revelation confirmed her worst suspicions about the negotiation. Someone had turned Proxima Station into a kill box, and Marcus was sitting directly in the center of it. Elena slipped into the ladies' refreshment facility, a multi-species accommodation that provided privacy for beings with various biological needs. Once inside, she activated a small device that would scramble any listening devices in the immediate area and opened a secure communication channel to the one person in the galaxy she trusted to help without asking questions. The holographic image that appeared was of a woman who looked remarkably similar to Elena, though perhaps 10 years younger, and with scars that told stories of battles fought in the dark spaces between stars. Commander Sarah Reeves of Earth's Deep Range Reconnaissance Division was Elena's former protege, current friend, and the only person who knew the full extent of Elena's capabilities. Echo 7, Sarah said, using Elena's old operational designation. I was wondering when you'd call. We've been monitoring some interesting communications traffic around Proxima Station. How interesting? Elena asked, keeping her voice low despite the privacy scrambler. The kind that suggests someone's planning a major incident involving high-profile casualties. The Zephyrian military has been moving assets for 3 weeks, but not where their official fleet positions indicate. And there's been a lot of encrypted chatter from Centaurian intelligence services about permanent solutions to diplomatic problems. Elena felt a cold, not forming in her stomach. Both sides. This isn't a territorial dispute that got out of hand. This was planned from the beginning. Someone wants a war, and they've decided that eliminating the mediator will provide the perfect justification. Marcus doesn't know. He still thinks he can find a peaceful solution. Sarah's expression softened slightly. He's a good man, Elena. But good men sometimes have to be protected from situations they don't understand. What do you need? Information about those maintenance workers I've been seeing. They're not station personnel, and Their equipment is wrong for anything resembling actual maintenance work. Give me 2 minutes. Sarah's image flickered as she accessed classified intelligence networks that most galactic government officials didn't even know existed. When she reappeared, her expression was grim. The maintenance teams were inserted 18 hours ago through a series of shell companies that trace back to both Zephyrian and Centaurian military intelligence. You're looking at a joint operation. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. They're working together. The entire territorial dispute is a fabrication. It gets worse. We've identified at least 30 combat-trained operatives on the station, all disguised as various support personnel. Whatever they're planning, they want to make sure there are no witnesses. Elena's mind raced through the tactical implications. 30 operatives was enough to secure a station this size and eliminate anyone who might interfere with their plans. But it was also enough to mount a credible defense against outside intervention, which suggested that the operation had been planned to withstand investigation by Galactic Council forces. Sarah, I need you to prepare an extraction team. If this goes bad, there may not be time for official diplomatic channels. Already in motion. Task Force Valkyrie is 6 hours out from your position, but that won't help if things get hot before then. 6 hours was an eternity in a tactical situation, but Elena had operated under worse circumstances. I'll figure something out. Just make sure they're ready to move fast when the time comes. Elena, Sarah said, her tone carrying the weight of shared history. Be careful. The intelligence suggests they want Marcus eliminated, but they'll consider you acceptable collateral damage. Don't give them an excuse to upgrade your threat assessment. The communication ended, leaving Elena alone in the refreshment facility with a choice that would define everything that followed. She could try to extract Marcus immediately, abandoning the negotiation and probably triggering the incident that someone wanted. Or she could maintain their cover and hope that her skills hadn't deteriorated too much during her years away from active duty. The station shuddered around her, just a slight tremor that most beings would dismiss as normal operational vibration. But Elena recognized the signature of weapons fire, and she knew that whatever timeline the conspirators had been following had just accelerated. She left the refreshment facility and began moving toward the conference room with the measured pace of someone concerned but not panicked. The corridors were more crowded than they had been earlier, with beings moving in directions that suggested they were being subtly herded rather than choosing their destinations freely. The disguised operatives were beginning to move into position for whatever came next. Elena reached the corridor outside Conference Room Alpha just as the first explosion echoed through the station. The lights flickered briefly, and emergency announcements began broadcasting in multiple languages, all delivering the same message. All civilians were to remain in their current locations while station security investigated a technical malfunction. Through the conference room's transparent aluminum walls, Elena could see Marcus standing at the head of the negotiation table, his expression showing the kind of confusion that came from watching carefully laid plans collapse without warning. The Zephyrian and Centaurian delegations were no longer focused on each other. They were watching the exits with the alert attention of beings waiting for a predetermined signal. The signal came in the form of a second explosion, this one close enough to rattle the windows and cause several decorative items to fall from their displays. The conference room's doors sealed automatically as the station's security protocols engaged, but Elena could see that the delegates weren't surprised by the lockdown. They had been expecting it. She was debating her options when a new voice spoke behind her. "Mrs. Chun, I believe you should come with us." Elena turned to find herself facing 3 beings she didn't immediately recognize. Tall, thin humanoids with pale skin and eyes that held too much intelligence for comfort. Their clothing marked them as station diplomatic staff, but their posture and the way they moved marked them as something else entirely. "I'm sorry," Elena said, adopting the slightly confused tone of a civilian caught in an unexpected situation, "but I think I should stay here until my husband's meeting is finished." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," the leader of the 3 said. Station security requires that all civilians be moved to designated safe areas while we address the current technical difficulties. Elena noted that none of the three had drawn weapons, which suggested they still believed she was what she appeared to be. It was a mistake she would use to her advantage, but only if she could do it without alerting other operatives to her capabilities. "Of course," she said, allowing a note of relief to enter her voice. "I was starting to worry about those explosions. Is the station under attack?" "Just technical problems," the leader assured her as they began walking down the corridor. "Nothing to be concerned about. We're taking you to a secure area where you'll be safe until the situation is resolved." Elena let them guide her through a series of corridors she hadn't seen during her earlier reconnaissance. The path they were taking led away from the main civilian areas and toward what appeared to be the station's administrative section. It was exactly where she would take someone if she wanted to interrogate them without being interrupted. They passed several checkpoints where disguised operatives stood guard, their positions carefully chosen to prevent anyone from reaching the communication centers or escape pods. Elena counted at least 12 additional personnel, bringing the total number of hostiles to over 40. The operation was even larger than Sarah's intelligence had suggested. The secure area turned out to be a small conference room deep in the station's administrative section. The furnishings were sparse, but comfortable, and the walls were lined with the kind of electronic dampening systems that would prevent any form of communication with the outside. "Please make yourself comfortable, Mrs. Chun," the leader said as his companions took positions by the door. "Someone will be with you shortly to explain the situation." Elena settled into one of the chairs and adopted the posture of a nervous civilian trying to appear calm. "How long do you think this will take? My husband will be worried if I'm not there when his meeting ends." The three exchanged glances that confirmed Elena's suspicions about Marcus's fate. "I'm sure everything will be resolved quickly," the leader said in the tone of someone delivering a comforting lie. They left her alone in the room, but Elena could hear them taking positions in the corridor outside. She was effectively imprisoned, but her captors had made the classic mistake of underestimating their target. They had seen a diplomat's wife and assumed weakness, when they should have asked themselves why someone with her bearing and situational awareness had married a man whose job took him to the most dangerous places in the galaxy. Elena began a systematic examination of the room, looking for anything that might serve as either a weapon or a means of escape. The conference table was too heavy to move easily, but its legs were detachable. The chairs were lightweight, but could be modified. Most promising was a decorative sculpture from what appeared to be Rigelian crystal. Beautiful to look at, but sharp enough to cut through most materials when properly applied. She was in the process of quietly testing the table legs connection points when a new explosion shook the station. This one was different from the previous blasts. Larger, more sustained, and followed by the unmistakable sound of structural damage. Whatever timeline the conspirators had been following, something had just gone very wrong with their plan. Elena felt the station's artificial gravity fluctuate briefly, a sign that primary systems were being damaged. In the corridor outside, she could hear urgent voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize, their tones suggesting that the situation was deteriorating faster than expected. The door to the conference room slid open, revealing a single figure that Elena definitely hadn't expected to see. Administrator HFY entered with movements that were far more predatory than his earlier diplomatic demeanor had suggested. His pale blue skin had taken on a darker hue, and his silver eyes held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. "Mrs. Elena Chun," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Or should I say, former Specialist Echo 7 of Earth's Special Operations Division." Elena maintained her civilian facade, but internally she was recalculating everything she thought she knew about the situation. "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else. I'm just a diplomat's wife." HFY smiled with genuine amusement. "Please, Mrs. Chun, we've known about your background from the moment your husband was assigned to this negotiation. Did you really think that the Galactic Council would entrust such an important mediation to someone without conducting thorough background investigations. The revelation that her identity was compromised changed everything. Elena abandoned her civilian posture and allowed her real personality to emerge. So what now? You kill me quietly while my husband dies in a staged terrorist attack. Oh, Ambassador Chin's death will be anything but staged, Vexhai said, his tone carrying the satisfaction of someone revealing a long-planned scheme. He's about to be murdered by Zephyrian extremists who believe the human mediators are biased against their territorial claims. The evidence will be quite convincing, especially since several witnesses will survive to tell the story. And I'm supposed to play the grieving widow who confirms whatever narrative you're selling. Actually, you're supposed to die attempting to avenge your husband's death. The story will be quite tragic. A woman driven to violence by grief, killed while attacking innocent diplomatic personnel. It will do wonders for discrediting human emotional stability in future galactic affairs. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying Vexhai with the analytical gaze she'd once used to assess enemy capabilities during black operations. This is about more than territory or trade disputes. Someone wants humanity marginalized in galactic affairs, and they're using a fake war as cover for political assassination. Humanity has risen too far, too fast in galactic society. Your species has a disturbing tendency to find peaceful solutions to problems that other races prefer to resolve through force. It creates complications for those who profit from conflict. The admission confirmed Elena's growing suspicion that this operation extended far beyond the Zephyrian and Centaurian governments. Someone with significant resources and influence had orchestrated this entire scenario, and they had done it specifically to eliminate human diplomatic influence. "Who's running this operation?" she asked, genuinely curious about the scope of what they were facing. "That information is well above your security clearance, Mrs. Chun. What you need to understand is that your husband's death will serve a greater purpose than his life ever could have." Vexhai stood and moved toward the door, apparently satisfied that he had delivered his villain's monologue effectively. It was exactly the kind of mistake that Elena had seen countless enemies make over the years. The assumption that talking was safer than killing when dealing with someone whose capabilities they didn't fully understand. "Administrator," Elena called after him, her voice carrying a note of polite curiosity. "One more question." He paused at the doorway, turning back with the indulgent expression of someone humoring a condemned prisoner's final request. "Yes." Elena moved with the fluid speed of someone for whom violence had been a daily profession for over 2 decades. The crystal sculpture became a projectile that struck Vexhai's throat with enough force to crush his larynx, while the detached table legs served as both club and spear as she disabled the guards in the corridor. The entire encounter lasted less than 15 seconds, leaving Elena standing in a corridor lined with unconscious operatives and wondering why she had ever thought that retirement would be more peaceful than active duty. She was reaching for Vexhai's communication device when the station's intercom system crackled to life. "Attention, all personnel," a voice announced in the clipped tones of someone reading from a prepared script. "We have confirmed reports of terrorist activity in Conference Room Alpha. Ambassador Marcus Chun of Earth has been killed by Zephyrian extremists. All security personnel are authorized to use lethal force against any individuals who resist detainment for questioning." Elena felt something inside her chest go cold and sharp, a familiar sensation from her operational days that she had hoped never to experience again. The emotion wasn't grief. Grief would come later, when she had time to process what she had lost. What she felt now was the calm, focused rage of a predator that had just been given permission to hunt. She activated Vexhai's communication device and began accessing the station's internal systems with codes she had memorized years ago, but hoped never to use. The security cameras showed her everything she needed to know. Marcus's body on the conference room floor, the Zephyrian and Centaurian delegates standing over him with weapons drawn, and Administrator Vexhi's co-conspirators beginning to realize that their carefully planned operation had just acquired a significant complication. Elena Chun, Diplomat's wife, was dead. What remained was Specialist Echo 7, and she was about to remind the galaxy why Earth's special forces had earned their reputation in the darkest corners of space. The hunt was about to begin. Elena stood over Administrator Vexhi's body for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to strip him of everything useful and to let the reality of Marcus's death settle into her mind like ice forming in her veins. The communication device, security access cards, and personal weapon would all serve her purposes in the hours ahead. But, more importantly, those 30 seconds allowed her to transition fully from the woman who had loved Marcus Chun to the weapon that would avenge him. The station's internal communication system was buzzing with reports from the various operative teams positioned throughout Proxima Station. Elena listened with the practiced ear of someone who had spent years intercepting enemy communications, sorting the useful intelligence from the operational chatter. Sector 7. Report status on secondary targets. Sector 7 confirms all civilian witnesses have been secured for processing. Understood. Begin Phase 3 implementation. Remember, we need survivors who can confirm the official narrative. Elena accessed the station's security grid through Vexhi's codes and began mapping the positions of the hostile operatives. The display showed a web of red dots positioned at strategic points throughout the station: communication hubs, escape pod bays, and the main docking facilities. They had turned Proxima Station into a perfect trap, designed to ensure that no one could escape to contradict whatever story they planned to tell about Marcus's death. What they hadn't planned for was a target who had no intention of escaping. Elena moved through the administrative section with the fluid silence of someone for whom stealth had been a survival skill long before it became an art form. The corridors were mostly empty now, with the disguised operatives having moved to their assigned positions for what they apparently called Phase 3. She encountered only 2 guards, both of whom she eliminated with efficiency born of muscle memory and years of training that had never fully faded. The first real challenge came when she reached the station's central hub, a massive chamber that housed the primary computer cores and communication arrays. According to the intelligence she had gathered from the intercepted communications, this was where the operations commanders were coordinating their activities. It was also where she would find the evidence needed to prove that Marcus's death had been an assassination rather than the terrorist attack it appeared to be. The hub was protected by 6 operatives positioned at strategic points around the chamber. Elena studied their positions from a maintenance access way that provided clear sight lines to the entire area. The guards were professionals, but they had positioned themselves to defend against external threats rather than someone who was already inside their security perimeter. Elena began her attack with the patience of a hunter who understands that the perfect moment is worth waiting for. She disabled the first guard silently, using his own weapon to create a distraction that drew the second guard away from his position. The third and fourth guards fell to improvised weapons crafted from maintenance equipment, while the fifth guard died without ever seeing his attacker. The sixth guard proved more challenging. He was a Zephyrian military operative whose enhanced reflexes and natural aggression made him a formidable opponent in close combat. Elena found herself engaged in a fight that reminded her why she had originally chosen to retire from active duty. Not because she couldn't win, but because winning required her to become someone she wasn't sure she liked. When the Zephyrian finally fell, Elena stood in the center of the hub, surrounded by the bodies of beings who had believed themselves to be predators. The irony wasn't lost on her that they had all died protecting a lie designed to frame their own species for terrorism. The main communication console provided access to the operational files that revealed the true scope of what she was facing. The conspiracy extended far beyond the Zephyrian and Centaurian governments. It was a joint operation involving intelligence services from at least 6 different species, all coordinated by a shadow organization that called itself the Galactic Stability Collective. The files contained details that made Elena's blood run cold. Marcus's assassination was just the beginning of a campaign designed to eliminate human diplomatic influence throughout the galaxy. Similar operations were planned for every human ambassador and negotiator currently serving in contested regions. The goal was to create a narrative of human instability and unreliability that would justify excluding Earth from major galactic affairs. But the most chilling revelation was the list of targets that came after the diplomatic corps. Scientists who had developed peaceful applications for military technology. Traders who had established successful partnerships with previously hostile species. Even cultural ambassadors whose work had helped bridge the gap between human and alien societies. The Galactic Stability Collective intended to systematically eliminate anyone whose success demonstrated humanity's potential as a galactic power. Elena downloaded everything to a secure storage device and began implementing her own version of Phase 3. If the conspirators wanted a narrative about human instability, she would give them one, but not the story they expected. The station's internal security systems yielded to her access codes like doors opening before a key. Elena began rerouting power, adjusting atmospheric controls, and modifying the gravity generators in specific sections of the station. She wasn't trying to destroy Proxima Station. That would eliminate the evidence she needed to preserve. Instead, she was turning it into a maze where she held every advantage, and her enemies would find themselves fighting on her terms. The first indication that something had gone wrong with the conspirators' plan came when Sector 5 reported that they had lost contact with the central hub. Elena listened to the growing panic in their communications as teams began investigating the loss of their command center. Hub team, please respond. We show multiple alerts from your sector. Sector 5 to all teams. We're getting system anomalies throughout the station. Someone's accessed the main computers. That's impossible. All target personnel are secured, and the civilians don't have the codes. Elena smiled grimly as she listened to their growing confusion. They had planned for everything except the possibility that their target might be someone who knew how to fight back. The next phase of her plan required movement through areas of the station that were now actively patrolled by hostile forces. Elena had changed into clothing taken from one of the eliminated guards, which would provide some concealment, but wouldn't stand up to close inspection. She needed to reach the diplomatic quarters where the civilian witnesses were being held, both to preserve their lives and to ensure that someone besides herself would survive to tell the true story of what had happened. The route to the diplomatic quarters took her through the main promenade, a vast space lined with shops and restaurants that served the station's normal population of travelers and traders. The area was now empty except for the operatives who had positioned themselves to control movement between different sections of the station. Elena moved through the shadows cast by ornamental displays and decorative gardens that had been designed to make travelers from dozens of different worlds feel welcome. The irony that she was using beauty as camouflage while planning violence wasn't lost on her, but she had long ago learned to compartmentalize such contradictions. The first group of operatives she encountered was a four-being patrol moving through the promenade with the systematic efficiency of soldiers conducting a sweep. Elena waited until they had passed her concealed position, then followed them with the silent grace of a predator stalking prey. She eliminated them one by one, using the ambient noise of the station's environmental systems to mask any sounds of combat. By the time she reached the diplomatic quarters, Elena had disabled or killed 17 additional operatives. She was beginning to feel the accumulated strain of sustained combat, but her training held firm. Years of retirement hadn't dulled her skills as much as she had hoped they might. The diplomatic quarters were under heavy guard, with teams positioned to prevent anyone from approaching the areas where civilian witnesses were being held. Elena studied their positions from the cover of a decorative fountain that had been crafted to represent the three primary stars of the Proxima system. The guards had made the mistake of assuming that their primary threat would come from organized rescue attempts rather than a single operative working alone. Their positioning was designed to stop a frontal assault by multiple attackers, which left significant blind spots that someone with Elena's training could exploit. She began her approach with a diversion that drew half the guards away from their positions. A small explosive device, crafted from maintenance chemicals and triggered by a timer improvised from a portable communication unit, created enough noise and confusion to suggest that someone was attempting to breach the outer perimeter. While the guards responded to the fake threat, Elena moved through the diplomatic quarters with methodical precision. She found a first group of civilian witnesses in what had once been a luxury suite, now serving as a makeshift prison. The dozen beings held there represented several different species, all of whom had been in the wrong place at the wrong time when the operation began. "Stay quiet and follow me," Elena whispered as she disabled the locks on their restraints. "There are people on this station who want to hurt you, but I'm going to get you somewhere safe." The civilians looked at her with the mixture of hope and terror that she had seen countless times during extraction operations. They didn't know who she was or why she was helping them, but they recognized competence when they saw it. Moving the civilians through hostile territory required a different set of tactics than Elena had been using for her solo operations. She couldn't rely on stealth alone. She needed to clear paths and establish secure routes that could accommodate beings who weren't trained for combat situations. The solution came in the form of the station's service corridors, a network of maintenance passages that connected different sections without passing through the main public areas. Elena had memorized their layout during her earlier reconnaissance, and they provided the perfect means of moving unseen through areas that were now crawling with operatives. The service corridors were cramped and poorly lit, designed for maintenance robots rather than organic beings. But they were also largely ignored by the operations planners, who had focused their attention on controlling the main traffic arteries through the station. Elena led her group of rescued civilians through the maze of passages with the confidence of someone following a memorized route. Behind them, she could hear the sounds of the operatives discovering that their prisoners had escaped, followed by increasingly frantic communications as teams were diverted to begin a station-wide search. The destination Elena had chosen was the station's emergency medical center, a heavily shielded facility designed to function independently even if the rest of the station lost power or life support. More importantly, it was equipped with its own communication array that could send messages throughout the galaxy without going through the main systems that the conspirators had compromised. Getting to the medical center required crossing the central hub, where Elena had earlier eliminated the command team. The area was now swarming with operatives who had discovered the bodies and were attempting to restore their compromised command structure. Elena studied the tactical situation with the analytical mindset she had developed during her years of active service. 23 hostile operatives occupied the hub, positioned to defend the computer cores and communication arrays. They had established overlapping fields of fire and mutual support positions that would make any direct assault extremely costly. But Elena wasn't planning a direct assault. Instead, she activated the modifications she had made to the station's systems during her earlier visit to the hub. Gravity generators began cycling through rapid variations that left the operatives struggling to maintain their footing. Atmospheric processors shifted the air composition just enough to affect breathing rhythms without causing immediate harm. Emergency lighting began strobing in patterns designed to interfere with the visual systems of multiple species. In the chaos that followed, Elena moved her civilian charges through the hub with the systematic efficiency of someone executing a plan she had rehearsed in her mind dozens of times. The operatives were too busy dealing with the environmental hazards to notice additional movement in the darkened chamber. The medical center's blast door sealed behind them with a satisfying thud that announced their temporary safety. Elena immediately began activating the facility's independent communication systems while the civilians settled into the secure treatment areas. The first message she sent was to Commander Sarah Reeves, providing coordinates and a request for immediate extraction of the surviving witnesses. The second message went to the Galactic Council's Emergency Response Center, containing a complete data dump of the evidence she had gathered about the Galactic Stability Collective and their assassination operation. But the third message was the most important. Elena accessed a secure communication channel that she had hoped never to use again, connecting her directly to the command structure of Earth's military intelligence services. Priority Alpha message for Director Chun, she said into the recorder, using the formal language of official communications. This is Specialist Echo 7 reporting the death of Ambassador Marcus Chun and the discovery of a galactic conspiracy targeting human Diplomat personnel. Request immediate activation of defensive protocols for all human representatives currently serving in contested regions. The war against humanity has already begun. We just didn't know it yet. As Elena sent the message that would change everything, she could hear the sounds of the operatives beginning their assault on the medical center's defenses. They had finally realized that their carefully planned operation had been compromised by someone who understood their tactics better than they understood hers. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that killing Marcus Chun would leave Elena broken and helpless, a victim to be manipulated or eliminated as convenient. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous, a warrior with nothing left to lose and all the skills necessary to make them pay for their mistake. The hunt was about to become a war. The medical center's blast doors held against the initial assault, but Elena knew they wouldn't hold forever. The operatives outside were using military-grade cutting equipment, and the distinctive whine of plasma torches told her that they had perhaps 20 minutes before the barriers failed. She spent 10 of those minutes ensuring that the civilian witnesses were secure and that her messages had successfully transmitted to their destinations. The remaining time was devoted to preparing for what would likely be her final stand. Elena had always known that retirement was temporary for people like her. Soldiers might leave the battlefield, but the battlefield had a way of finding them eventually. She had hoped to give Marcus a normal life, to be the stable partner he deserved after years of navigating galactic politics. Instead, she had become the instrument of his vengeance. The medical center's defensive systems were impressive, but not designed to withstand sustained assault by professional military operatives. Elena modified what she could, turning healing equipment into weapons and medical supplies into improvised explosives. The center's surgical suite became a fortress within a fortress, equipped with blast barriers designed to contain radiation from emergency procedures, but equally effective at stopping projectile weapons. Commander Reeves responded to Elena's message with characteristic efficiency. Echo 7, this is Valkyrie Actual. Task Force is accelerating approach, ETA 4 hours. Can you maintain position? 4 hours was an eternity in a combat situation, especially when outnumbered 20-1 by professional killers who had planned this operation for months. But Elena had held worse positions with less support, and she had never failed to complete a mission that mattered. Valkyrie Actual, Echo 7 holding position with civilian assets secured. Be advised that opposition includes intelligence operatives from multiple species coordinated by previously unknown hostile organization. Recommend full tactical response upon arrival. Understood, Echo 7. We're bringing everything we have. Elena found herself smiling grimly at Sarah's response. Task Force Valkyrie was Earth's most elite rapid response unit, composed of operators who had learned their trade in the same shadowy conflicts that had forged Elena's reputation. If anyone could extract her from this situation, it would be them. The plasma torches finally breached the blast doors, sending molten metal cascading across the medical center's main chamber. The first wave of attackers came through the gap with the practiced coordination of beings who had conducted similar assaults countless times before. They moved like professionals, using cover and mutual support to minimize their exposure while advancing toward the inner defensive positions. Elena met them with the cold efficiency of someone for whom killing had become both art and science. Her position in the surgical suite provided perfect sight lines to the main chamber, and She had modified the medical equipment to create overlapping fields of fire that would have made a military engineer proud. The first 3 operatives fell to precision shots that demonstrated why Elena had once been considered the most dangerous sniper in Earth Special Forces. The 4th and 5th attackers made it closer to her position, but not close enough to pose a real threat. The 6th operative was a Centaurian whose aquatic origins made him naturally resistant to the atmospheric modifications Elena had implemented, but he still died when a surgical laser found a vulnerable spot behind his gills. The assault continued for over an hour, with waves of operatives attempting to overwhelm Elena's position through sheer weight of numbers. But the medical center's layout favored the defender, and Elena's modifications had turned every corridor into a killing field. The attackers were forced to advance through choke points where their numerical superiority meant nothing, facing an enemy who knew exactly how to exploit every tactical advantage. By the time the operatives called for a tactical pause, Elena had eliminated 47 attackers while suffering only minor injuries herself. The floor of the medical center was littered with the bodies of beings from a dozen different species, all united in death by their participation in a conspiracy that had cost them everything. During the lull in the fighting, Elena accessed the station's communication systems to monitor the growing chaos throughout Proxima Station. The carefully orchestrated operation was falling apart as teams lost contact with their commanders and reported equipment failures throughout their assigned sectors. Central Command, this is Team Leader Vorthe K. We've lost contact with the primary asset team, and our technical specialists report system-wide malfunctions. Request immediate reinforcement. Team Leader Vorthe K. Central Command is non-responsive. Switching to secondary command protocols. All teams, this is Secondary Commander Plexhan. We have confirmed that our primary target has been eliminated, but we're dealing with an unknown hostile who has compromised station systems. Switch to containment protocols and prepare for emergency extraction. Elena listened with professional interest as the conspiracy began consuming itself from within. The operatives had planned for resistance from station security and even intervention by Galactic Council forces, but they hadn't planned for a single opponent who could turn their own advantages against them. The second assault on the medical center began with a different approach. Instead of direct assault, the operatives attempted to breach the facility through its ventilation systems and service connections. Elena had anticipated this tactic and prepared accordingly, but it required her to divide her attention between multiple potential entry points. The fighting became more intimate and more brutal as operatives managed to infiltrate the medical center's outer sections. Elena found herself engaged in close combat with beings whose training rivaled her own, warriors who had been selected specifically for operations like this. The surgical suite became a maze of makeshift barricades and improvised weapons as the battle devolved into a series of individual duels. Elena killed a Zephyrian assassin with a bone saw, disabled a Rigelian infiltrator with surgical thread turned into a garrote, and used a medical scanner's power cell to create an explosive that eliminated 3 operatives who had taken cover behind an overturned treatment table. Each victory came at a cost: cuts, bruises, and the gradual exhaustion that came from sustained combat against multiple opponents. But Elena had one advantage that her enemies couldn't match. She was fighting for something more than money or political ideology. Every shot she fired was payment for Marcus's blood. Every operative she eliminated was justice for a good man who had believed that words could triumph over violence. The conspiracy had killed her husband, but they had also awakened something in Elena that had been sleeping for 20 years. The tide of battle turned when Elena managed to access the station's main power distribution center through the medical facility's emergency connections. Instead of simply shutting down power to her enemies' positions, she began systematically overloading the systems that supported their advanced equipment. Combat armor began failing as power cells overcharged and vented their energy in spectacular displays of sparks and smoke. Communication systems crashed as Elena introduced feedback loops that scrambled encrypted channels. Environmental suits lost their atmospheric processing capabilities, forcing operatives to choose between maintaining their assault or retreating to areas with breathable air. Within 30 minutes, the sophisticated military operation had degraded to the level of a street fight between beings armed with improvised weapons and whatever equipment they could salvage from their failing gear. It was exactly the kind of environment where Elena's experience and adaptability gave her overwhelming advantages. The final assault came as a desperate charge by the remaining operatives, a last attempt to overwhelm Elena's position before their mission collapsed completely. They came through every entrance simultaneously, abandoning tactical caution in favor of overwhelming aggression. Elena met them in the medical center's main chamber, fighting with the fluid grace of someone for whom violence had become a form of artistic expression. She moved through the attacking forces like a dancer, each motion flowing seamlessly into the next as she eliminated targets with surgical precision. When the shooting stopped, Elena stood alone in the center of a chamber filled with the bodies of beings who had underestimated what humans were capable of when properly motivated. She was bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, her improvised armor was torn and stained, and her ammunition was exhausted. But she was alive, and the conspiracy that had killed Marcus was dying around her. Elena activated the medical center's communication system one final time, broadcasting on all frequencies that the station's systems could reach. Attention Galactic Council Emergency Response Forces. This is Elena Chun, widow of Ambassador Marcus Chun. Proxima Station has been secured, and evidence of a multi-species conspiracy against human diplomatic personnel has been preserved. Request immediate investigation and protection of surviving witnesses. The response came not from the Galactic Council, but from a voice Elena recognized with profound relief. Elena, this is Task Force Valkyrie. We're docking now. Are you injured? Nothing that won't heal, Sarah. But I need medical attention for the civilian witnesses, and we need to secure this station before anyone tries to sanitize the evidence. Already in motion. We brought a full investigative team, and we've got warships from 3 different council species providing security. Nobody's going to cover this up. Elena sank into one of the medical center's treatment chairs, finally, allowing herself to acknowledge the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through hours of combat was beginning to fade, leaving behind the kind of bone-deep weariness that she remembered from her operational days. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, a sense of completion that she hadn't experienced since retiring from active duty. For 20 years, she had tried to be someone other than the weapon that Earth's military had created. She had played the role of Diplomat's wife, supporting Marcus's work and believing that she could leave her old life behind. The conspiracy that killed Marcus had forced her to remember who she really was. They had awakened a sleeping predator, and that predator had reminded the galaxy why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in known space when pushed beyond their limits. As Task Force Valkyrie's operators began securing Proxima Station, and Elena prepared to tell her story to the investigators who would bring justice for Marcus's death, she reflected on the price of underestimating humanity's capacity for both love and vengeance. The Galactic Stability Collective had wanted to eliminate human diplomatic influence by demonstrating that humans were too emotional and unstable to serve as mediators in galactic affairs. Instead, they had proven that humans would go to any lengths to protect those they loved and to seek justice for those they had lost. Marcus Chun had believed in the power of words to change the galaxy. Elena Chun had just demonstrated that sometimes action spoke louder than any diplomatic negotiation ever could. The war was far from over, but the first battle belonged to humanity. 6 months after the Proxima Station incident, Elena Chun stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council in the Great Chamber on Coruscant Prime, the political heart of known space. The massive amphitheater was filled with beings from hundreds of worlds, all gathered to witness what historians would later call the most significant diplomatic moment in galactic history. Elena wore the simple black dress of human mourning, but the beings who packed the gallery knew that her appearance was deceptive. The woman who had single-handedly dismantled a multi-species conspiracy had become something of a legend throughout the galaxy, spoken of in hushed tones as both an example of human capability and a warning about the consequences of underestimating Earth citizens. The investigation that followed the Proxima Station incident had revealed the scope of the Galactic Stability Collective's operations with shocking clarity. The conspiracy had involved intelligence services from 12 different species, coordinated through a shadow network that had been operating for over 30 years. Their goal had been nothing less than the complete marginalization of humanity in galactic affairs, achieved through a campaign of assassination, sabotage, and political manipulation. Ambassador Marcus Chun had been their first target, but he would not have been their last. The evidence Elena had preserved showed plans to eliminate every human diplomat, scientist, and cultural ambassador who had achieved significant influence in galactic society. The conspiracy had intended to create a narrative of human instability and unreliability that would justify excluding Earth from all major decisions affecting the galaxy's future. What they had achieved instead was to demonstrate humanity's willingness to seek justice regardless of the cost, and their capacity for precision violence when peaceful solutions were denied to them. Elena stepped to the speaker's podium with the measured pace of someone who had learned to command attention through presence rather than words. The chamber fell silent as beings who had only heard stories about the human widow finally saw her in person. She was smaller than many had expected, unremarkable in appearance, except for the eyes that held depths no civilian should possess. "Honored representatives," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. "I stand before you today not as a diplomat or a representative of Earth's government, but as the widow of Marcus Chun, and the living proof of what happens when peaceful beings are pushed beyond the limits of their tolerance." She paused, allowing her words to settle into the minds of beings who had spent centuries believing that humans were too young and too weak to pose any real threat to the established galactic order. "My husband believed in the power of negotiation, in the possibility that different species could find common ground despite their differences. He dedicated his life to proving that humanity could contribute something valuable to galactic civilization beyond military strength or economic power. The beings who murdered him sought to prove that his faith in peaceful coexistence was naive and misguided." Elena activated a holographic display that showed images from the Proxima Station incident, the diplomatic conference where Marcus had been killed, the evidence of the conspiracy that had orchestrated his death, and the aftermath of Elena's response to that betrayal. "The Galactic Stability Collective succeeded in killing my husband. They failed in everything else they attempted to achieve. Their operation has been exposed, their network has been dismantled, and the representatives of the species that participated in their conspiracy now face trial for crimes against galactic peace. But more importantly, they have learned something about humanity that they should have researched before they decided to test our resolve." The display changed to show tactical analyses of Elena's actions on Proxima Station, prepared by military experts from dozens of different species. The numbers were stark. One human operative had eliminated over 80 trained soldiers and intelligence agents while protecting civilian witnesses and preserving evidence of the conspiracy. It was a feat of combat efficiency that had impressed even the galaxy's most experienced military commanders. "Humans are not naturally violent beings," Elena continued. "We prefer negotiation to conflict, cooperation to competition, and building to destroying. But we're also not naturally submissive beings. When you kill our diplomats, you teach us that diplomacy has limits. When you threaten our families, you learn why we spent thousands of years developing increasingly efficient ways to protect what we love." The chamber was so quiet that the only sound was the gentle hum of the life support systems that maintained the complex atmospheric mixture needed to support the dozens of species present. Elena had captured the attention of every being in the vast space, delivering a message that was both warning and promise. The investigation that followed my husband's death revealed something that I believe this council needs to understand clearly. The Galactic Stability Collective chose to target humanity not because we were strong enough to threaten their interests, but because we were successful enough to challenge their assumptions. They could not tolerate the possibility that a young species might find solutions to problems that had divided the galaxy for centuries. Elena touched a control that changed the display to show diplomatic record from across the galaxy, documenting successful negotiations that Marcus and other human ambassadors had facilitated. Trade disputes resolved, territorial conflicts ended peacefully, and cultural exchanges that had built bridges between species that had been enemies for generations. My husband and his colleagues succeeded where others had failed, not because they possessed superior technology or military strength, but because they approached each situation with the assumption that every species had legitimate interests that could be addressed through creative compromise. They believed that the galaxy was large enough for everyone, and that cooperation would always produce better results than conflict. The display shifted again, showing the current state of galactic affairs. In the 6 months since Proxima Station, human diplomatic influence had expanded dramatically as species that had previously dismissed Earth's representatives began requesting their involvement in complex negotiations. The conspiracy had achieved the exact opposite of its intended goals. The beings who killed Marcus believed that demonstrating human emotional volatility would convince the galaxy that we were unfit for positions of trust and responsibility. Instead, they demonstrated something that apparently many species had forgotten, that there are fates worse than war for those who choose violence over justice. Elena's voice carried no malice, no threat of revenge, or promise of retaliation. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone stating obvious facts that required no elaboration. I did not seek vengeance on Proxima Station. I sought justice, and I found it. The conspiracy that murdered my husband has been exposed and destroyed. The species that participated in it now understand the cost of underestimating human determination. And the galaxy has learned something important about what Earth brings to galactic civilization. She paused again, studying the faces in the gallery that represented hundreds of worlds and billions of sentient beings. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the most technologically advanced, or the most numerous. We are, however, the most committed to the principle that every sentient being deserves the chance to live in peace with their neighbors. When that peace is threatened, we will use every tool at our disposal to restore it. Diplomacy when possible, force when necessary, but justice always. The display changed one final time, showing the current positions of Earth's expanded diplomatic corps and the military forces that now supported them. In the months following Proxima Station, humanity had transformed from a minor player in galactic affairs to one of the most requested mediators for complex disputes. But they had also demonstrated the capacity to protect their representatives and their interests with lethal efficiency when threatened. The Galactic Council has asked me to address the question of how to prevent similar incidents in the future. The answer is simple. Recognize that humanity's commitment to peaceful coexistence is not weakness, and our preference for negotiation is not submission. We will continue to seek diplomatic solutions to every problem we encounter, but we will also ensure that those who mistake our peaceful nature for helplessness understand their error before it proves fatal. Elena stepped back from the podium, her message delivered with the precision of someone who had chosen each word carefully. She had not threatened anyone, made demands, or asked for special consideration. She had simply explained what the galaxy should expect from humanity in the years ahead. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives from dozens of species rose to offer formal condolences for Marcus's death, apologies for their government's failures to prevent the conspiracy, and requests for increased human involvement in diplomatic affairs. The small, supposedly weak species from a frontier world, had become one of the most influential voices in galactic politics through the simple expedient of demonstrating their principles rather than merely talking about them. As Elena left the chamber, she carried with her the knowledge that Marcus's death had not been in vain. His belief in the power of peaceful coexistence had been vindicated, even though it had taken an act of terrible violence to prove his point. The galaxy now understood that humans could be trusted as mediators precisely because they were willing to fight for justice when peaceful means failed. Commander Sarah Reeves was waiting in the corridor outside the chamber, her dress uniform bearing the ribbons and insignia that marked her as one of Earth's most decorated special operations officers. She had been promoted to Director of Diplomatic Security following the Proxima Station incident, a position created specifically to ensure that human representatives would never again face the kind of coordinated assassination attempt that had killed Marcus. "How did it feel?" Sarah asked as they walked together toward the spaceport where Elena's transport was waiting. "Like saying goodbye," Elena replied. Marcus always believed that words could change the galaxy. "I think you would be pleased to know that sometimes actions speak louder than any speech ever could." They paused at the observation deck that offered a view of the spaceport and the ships that connected hundreds of worlds in a vast web of commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Among the vessels preparing for departure was a new class of ship that bore the insignia of Earth's diplomatic corps. Sleek, fast transports equipped with the most advanced defensive systems that human engineering could provide. "What's next for you?" Sarah asked. Elena smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness that her old friend had seen from her in months. "I've been offered a position as senior advisor to the diplomatic corps. Apparently, they think my experience might be useful in training the next generation of human representatives." "And you accepted?" "I accepted." Marcus spent 15 years proving that humans could build bridges between species that had been enemies for centuries. "I think I could spend a few years teaching our diplomats how to protect those bridges from beings who prefer the galaxy divided and afraid." As Elena's transport lifted off from Coruscant Prime, carrying her back toward Earth and her new life, she reflected on the price that had been paid for the peace that Marcus had believed in. The galaxy was safer now, not because it was more heavily armed or more tightly controlled, but because every potential aggressor understood the consequences of mistaking human compassion for weakness. The conspiracy that had killed Ambassador Marcus Chun had intended to prove that humans were too emotional and unstable to serve as galactic mediators. Instead, they had proven that humans were exactly the kind of species the galaxy needed, beings committed to peace but capable of war, diplomatic by nature, but ruthless in defense of justice. Marcus Chun had died believing in the power of words to change hearts and minds. Elena Chun had lived to demonstrate that sometimes the most eloquent argument was delivered at the point of gun held by someone who would rather be holding a pen. The galaxy would remember both lessons.